In the second half of February, I received a telegram from friends. Agafya is ill. We will take her out by helicopter to Tashtub. And 4 weeks later, in letters and telegrams, the stunning news: Agafya got married. The surname, name and patronymic of the newlywed were called. While I, alarmed and puzzled, was getting ready for a long journey, another letter came from Agafya. Not a word about marriage. Curved, hasty lines, as usual, with a mention of God, with a wish for health. Essence, come for Christ's sake. I am sickened in sorrow. 3 of us gathered to fly from Tashtub, standing on the edge of the Abakan Taiga, Nikolai Nikolaevich Savushkin, who has been taking human part in the fate of the Lykovs for many years, and journalist Nikolai Ustinovich Zhuravlev, who visited the Lykovs in 1982, and I. It's unusual without Arafay. He's on the drill watch. After 2 years of professional hunting, I realized that I had not taken up my own business. Again asked to be a driller. And one more piece of news: the exploration site is living out its last year. The village, the residential heart closest to Agafya's hut, will be abandoned. It will become difficult, almost impossible to get to this corner of the Taiga without airplane opportunities. In the forestry enterprise, and at the airfield in Tashtub, we try to find out from friends and acquaintances, what is there in the Taiga? Everyone smiles. She's married. They call him a newlywed, a local resident, an old believer. Already from the pilots we learn with chagrin, the master of the house is not there. 3 days ago he flew out of the Taiga with a passing flight. Abakan was opened early this year. Along the entire course, the river is already free of ice. But the recently fallen snow fringes the greenish water, glistens with sugar on the hills. The Taiga is transparent. Between the trees I would even see a hair from above. But nothing alive can be seen, although the local cedar grove is not poor. The helicopter is in a hurry on business. Therefore, we fly by, without landing, the sediment of Geologists. Then we see on the left along Abakan the old abandoned hut of the Lykovs. And now a plume of smoke from a residential hut, a goat on a leash, a dog with a soundless bark greets the helicopter, and, out of habit, runs to the place where it usually sits. While making a U-turn and descending, the hostess in grey baggy clothes, in her usual handkerchief, in galoshes, felt boots trimmed with rabbit fur, is hastily mincing to the cliff near the river. Conversation on the go is not on the main topic. Agafya shows the place by the river, where the Merrill was battened down by a wolf. Then she showed the place near the hut, where the strange wolf had been shot. Agafya's baptized, barely seeing the stray beast, said, "What a dog, a wolf." Agafya insisted on shooting him immediately. Consideration, let's wait a little. Vasil Mikhailik will fly in and take pictures, was rejected. It's impossible to live with wolves. They will still breed. The strange behavior of the wolf was not the only animal that ran into these lands in winter. About 10 days ago, a whole pack of wolves drove a young Merrill to the edge of the river. A deer fell off a cliff, broke his leg, and skinned his side. Fleeing from predators, he wandered into the river opposite the hut. The doomed beast was shot. Cutting carcasses, salting meat was the last page of a short family life. Realizing all the delicacy of the moment, we were in no hurry with questions. Agafya started herself. We listened without interrupting while she spoke. "That's it. I wrote to Sergei Petrovich Cherepanov, head of the exploration expedition. I renounce Ivan Vasilievich Tropin. I wrote to the mothers, nuns, on the Obroyenissay repentance and prayer to be tonsured as a nun. Having already returned from the Taiga to Abaza, we tracked down the failed spouse, talked with the head of the exploration expedition, who visited the newlyweds on their honeymoon. Comparison of what was heard clarifies the drama, ordinary, common in the sea of everyday life, but here, under exceptional circumstances, bitterly painful. It is sinful to live in the world, it is impossible to live in the world." Old man Lykov himself preserved this view until his last breath and bequeathed to his daughter, to adhere to the righteous faith. He did not bless to join even fellow believers living in the remote village of Gornaya Shoria. And Agafya of the covenant holds fast. The Taitenka saw the relief of her fate in the entrapment of someone in their Taiga solitude. Life has shown that desire is unrealizable. Several people who had infiltrated here at different times turned out to be either inveterate swindlers or naive people, touched. Agafya humorously talked about the seekers, calling others not approved in the mind, others lost in faith or incapable of living in Taiga's acuity. Realizing that sooner or later parishionership may end in drama, we asked the authorities in Tashtub and Geologists, without whose transport it is very difficult to get here, to fence the Lykovs from idle curiosity and rogue And on the whole it was quite successful. But it is impossible to order Agafya herself. The character is Lykovsky. Having learned communication with people, she was already burdened without him, and did not lose hope of arranging life according to Tyatyu's behest. This winter, it was as if the desired event had been sought out. In the field of view of the Taiga woman was a fellow believer, even a relative of the 6th or 7th generation. Ivan Vasilievich Tropin. Living in Abaza, he visited Agafya more than once. He brought salt, flour, some household items, sympathetically related to her fate. Ivan Vasilievich read and interpreted the sacred books no worse than Agafya. However, he is infected with a worldly spirit, he is very drunk, and blasphemes during his drunkenness, said Agafya, who visited his house in Abaza during a trip to her relatives, with a sigh. The family life of a bearded old believer did not work out. He either drove his wife away, or she left. While on retirement, the Bobby got a job as a boatman for Geologists. We could not find out who gave the sign to whom. One way or another, Ivan Vasilievich appeared at the dead end with residence permits. As we understood, there was no objection. But Agafya offered to live like brother and sister. Without much work, the 63-year-old fellow believer was able to explain to her that such a life is impossible. We are living people, and God will have nothing against it. We must live like a husband and wife. Of course, there was no question of the registry office. No papers, no press, nothing worldly Lykovs did not recognize, and Agafya stands firmly on that. However, she found a means to legitimize the union. She wrote to the nuns on the Yenisei with a request to bless the marriage, and Ivan Vasilievich undertook to deliver the paper to its destination. He himself, showing the seriousness of his intentions, invited the head of the exploration expedition, whom Agafya knew well, as a witness. Sergei Petrovich told us that he was amazed at the transformation of the hut. The dishes are sparkling, the sheets are on the bed. The honeymoon, however, was cut short. The reason for this, as you can understand, is simple. Everything that begins a married life for Agafya turned out to be not honey, but bitter wormwood. Age, she is 45. The severity of faith, the belatedness of everything, fear. Everything merged into one. The unfortunate woman felt everything as sinful, unnecessary and absurd. Clarification of the relationship over the entire incident led to a quarrel. There were 2 obstinate characters, moreover, from 2 different worlds. I don't know if the question of the place of residence was included in the marriage contract. Ivan Vasilievich says that, thinking about living, he bought a house away from the village of Tashtub for a secluded life. Agafya allegedly tacitly agreed to a sortie from the Taiga, but at the decisive moment of explanation she refused to move anywhere. To which the betrothed said, "Well, I can't be here, and I don't want to live." In response, Agafya wrote to the witness of their union something like a solemn declaration, "I renounce Ivan Vasilievich Tropin." And to Ivan Vasilievich herself she handed a message to the mothers on the Yenisei, with tearful repentance and a prayer for Tanjur as a nun. This is not about the monastery, but about the status of life. Agafya wrote to Moscow in the confusion of feelings and thoughts, she had to share her shock with someone. In reflections, how to be? I reminded her of the last visit of relatives and said that I see the only way out of the impasse. To move to the village of religionists. You can't. Agafya says thoughtfully, fingering the silvery willow lamb with her fingernail. Agafya still explains the impossibility of living in the village, even in a separate hut, and with her own vegetable garden, by referring to the Tyatyu who did not bless such a move, as well as by clouding of faith. The kids with red rags around their necks are walking around, taking pictures. The doctor who came here also instilled in her the idea that in the village she would die of the flu. For 7 years of communication, we already know how difficult it is to convince Agafya of everything that does not agree with her habits, sanctified by the strength of faith. She will listen to everyone, and will make a decision, relying only on her understanding of the circumstances. Breaking a life stereotype is difficult for her, and can be really destructive. But here, in the Taiga trap, the threat to her life is almost palpable. Complaining about colds. Or you can twist your leg, or the bear will break. You look, and there is no one to call for help. The geologists will soon be gone. Pulls a willow twig with his fingers. What can God give, with a half-word understanding the disturbing question about the possible consequences of a fleeting marriage? Agafya looks up. No, God had mercy, the child will not. God had mercy. Returning to her experience, she again talks about the details of the appearance of a wolf near the hut. There was a sign. The omen, time heals wounds. Agafya looks at what she has experienced with a fair amount of irony, she even laughed cheerfully a couple of times. Appetite improves. Until Easter. 3 days, and Agafya, showing us the chicken coop, brought out a sieve with eggs. Collected for the holiday, domestic animals. Chickens, goats, dogs require attention and care. But this is exactly what is extremely necessary to fill life with at least something. And there is an acute need for good food with poor health. I killed a goat in winter. And from Christ Sunday I will drink milk. Agafya tied a summit from the reed. She hopes to catch fish in Erinat. There is a gun with a bandolier hanging right by the door. Shot on hazel grouse, bullets against bears. Well, show me how you shoot. Agafya willingly takes a single barrel and aims at a birch bark box lying in the garden. Well, here's to you, Voroshilov shooter. 1 shot. Nikolai Nikolaevich laughs. You won't hit the bear. Save the Lord from the bear. We were talking quietly, looking at the April park flowing over the vegetable garden, when the sound of a helicopter was heard in the distance. Agafya heard him first and started. That's goodbye. We rolled down the trail to a pebble spit by the river. Thank you for visiting. No voice is heard through the roar of the car. But the hand raised up is so eloquent, the eyes are expressive, it is so nagging to see a small figure near the water, the weather is bad. The pilots do not dare to climb into the clouds over the mountains. We fly along the canyon, repeating the bends of the cold and indifferent river.
After a chance meeting with the Lykovs in 1958, the Sturmer's tourist group came the longest period of time when no meetings with the Lykovs took place. And now it will take exactly 20 years before the meeting with the Geologists, about which the newspapers wrote a lot. All these years, like the previous 21 years, the Lykov family was face to face with the harsh nature of the western Sayan mountains, with a Massachusetts of difficulties that lay in wait for them literally at every step. This was expressed primarily in crop failures, in the onset of earlier than usual winter, when harvesting the main food product, potatoes, it was necessary to shovel snow. All this immediately affected the diet, and what is hunger, the family experienced more than once. The year 1961, more precisely, the winter from 1960 to 1961, was especially difficult, when due to poor harvest due to a sharp cold snap and snowfall in summer it was not possible to collect not only what the vegetable garden gave, but also what the Taiga gave, and winter met with almost no supplies. In the terrible winter on February 16, Akulina Karpovna died. Thus, the Lykov family was in complete isolation for 41 years. It should be noted that those meetings with people about whom we wrote did not in any way affect the well-being of the family. Well, a meeting took place, we talked, agreed on something, and the meeting ended there. But the main reason that the Lykovs were left to fend for themselves was the liquidation of the Altai Reserve in 1951, when there was no one to even think about the Lykovs. These are the dates when there were short-term meetings that we know about: 1940, 1941, 1946, 1951, 1958. Until 1937, the Lykovs lived openly and openly. As for some other secret meetings, which can be read about in the newspapers, then, in my opinion, all this is the fruit of someone's imagination. In any case, we do not know anything, and we have never heard from anyone that who something goes to them, helps this family, regularly delivers them food, etc. In the newspaper, Moskovsky Komsomolets na Altai, in one of the articles about the Lykovs you can read the following: their nephews who lived in a bazaar constantly supplied them everything necessary, went up the river in a boat and brought salt, sugar and other food. Where is it from? Who could report this? There was nothing of the kind and could not be. No one ever delivered flour, salt, let alone sugar and other food, to them, before meeting with geologists, and no one was with them during this 20-year period of time. Here it is appropriate to recall what Akulina Karpovna, the head of a group of geologists, who were abandoned by a helicopter about 15 kilometers from the Lykovs' place of residence, wrote in her memoirs. This group of 4, including Karpovna, was the first to meet with the Lykovs in 1978, 20 years after the Lykovs met with a group of Moscow tourists Yuri Sturmer. Studying the alleged place of work, the pilots drew the attention of geologists to a suspicious vegetable garden, which they managed to see from the air, choosing a convenient place for the helicopter to land. Thus, the geologists were to some extent prepared to meet mysterious people. In her memoirs, Pismanskaya involuntarily puts all the dots on the I, thereby proving that the Lykovs never had anyone, and that they would look different than the way they saw them. This is what she wrote when her group, focusing on the pilots' marks on the map, went to the Lykovs' house. Here are excerpts from beautifully written memoirs. And here is a dwelling near the stream. The hut, blackened by time and rains, was furnished on all sides with some kind of Taiga rubbish, bark, poles, gaps. If it were not for a window the size of my backpack pocket, it would be hard to believe that people live here. But they undoubtedly lived here. Next to the hut there was a green, well-groomed garden with potatoes, onions and turnips. A hole with fresh earth adhered to it lay at the edge. Our arrival was evidently noticed. The low door creaked. And into the light of day, as in a fairy tale, the figure of an ancient old man appeared. Barefoot. On the body there is a patched shirt made of burlap. From her there are trousers, and also in patches, an unkempt beard. Disheveled hair on the head. Frightened, very attentive look. And indecision. Shifting from foot to foot, as if the earth had suddenly become hot, the old man silently looked at us. We were also silent. This went on for a minute. I should have said something. I said, "Hello, grandfather. We are visiting you." The old man did not answer immediately. He stomped, looked around, touched the strap on the wall with his hand, and finally we heard a quiet, indecisive voice. "Well, come in if you came." The old man opened the door, and we found ourselves in a musty, sticky darkness. Again there was a painful silence, which suddenly broke through with sobs and lamentations. And only then did we see the silhouettes of two women. One was hysterical and prayed, "This is for our sins, for our sins." The other, holding on to the pillar that supported the sagging mat, slowly sank to the floor. The light from the window fell on her widened, mortally frightened eyes, and we realized that we had to go outside as soon as possible. The old man followed us. And he was also quite embarrassed, said that these were his two daughters. Letting our new acquaintances come to their senses, we laid out a fire on the side and got something from the food. About half an hour later, three figures approached the fire from under the canopy of the hut, a grandfather and his two daughters. There were no more signs of hysteria, fear and open curiosity on their faces. Those who came up resolutely refused from treating canned food, tea and bread. "We can't do that." On a stone hearth near the hut, they put a small iron pot with potatoes washed in the stream, covered it with stone tiles and waited. To the question, "Have you ever eaten bread?" the old man said, "I ate something. But they are not. Have not even seen." The daughters were dressed the same as the old man, in homespun hemp sacking. The cut of all the clothes was also baggy, holes for the head, a belt string. And all, solid patches. In the evening, the acquaintance had advanced quite far, and we already knew, the old man's name was Karp Osipovich, and the daughter's name was Natalya and Agafya. Surname Lykovs. With prayer our interlocutors interrupted a long drawn-out conversation. There were many questions from both sides. And the time has come to ask the main question for us: how did these people end up so far from people? Without losing caution in the conversation, the old man said that he and his wife left people at God's command. We cannot live in peace. The gifts we brought, a piece of linen, threads, needles, fishing hooks, were accepted here with gratitude. The sisters stroked the fabric with their hands, looked at the light. Pismanskaya's notes are taken from Peskov's book, Taiga Dead End. This short entry by Pismanskaya once again confirms the complete isolation of the Lykovs. For many years there was no connection with anyone. And geologists are laconic people, with great willpower and never say too much. I must say that the eldest daughter Natalya and son Savin saw people several times in their lives. When they lived in a village in Cairo, when they lived in Altai in the Turachek region, where Natalya was born, when observers of the reserve came to them, and in 1946 a military topographic detachment. Agafya and the youngest son Dmitry have never seen people. The first people they saw with their own eyes were the geologists of the Pismanskaya group. But if someone ever regularly visited the Lykovs, as the newspapers write, then from simple things like rubber and tarpaulin boots, felt boots, wadded quilted jackets, sheepskin coats, cheap fabrics such as flannel, thin tarpaulins, etc. for all the Lykovs as much as necessary. In the 1950s and 1960s, the counters of rural shops were filled with these goods. They could also bring cheap cereals, millet, buckwheat, oatmeal and, of course, salt. In common parlance, all these goods and products have always been, as they jokingly said, cheaper than water. But when the Lykovs were discovered and it became public, here the relatives immediately moved and began to visit and help, whoever could do anything. I must say that many of them practically began to forget about the Lykovs. Some old people passed away, the Lykovs' youth never saw, and they did not know exactly where they were, whether they were alive, especially since the rumors about their whereabouts were the most contradictory. In the articles about the Lykovs, one can also read such that Karp Osipovich allegedly for several years roamed the entire space within a radius of 700 kilometers from his home in order to find partners in life for his children. It's amazing how you can write what this thought came to. Or I wanted to somehow justify the life actions of the head of the family, for the years spent aimlessly. Yes, this could not be. What does 700 kilometers mean? Let's imagine. If Lykov really walked for many months over several years at such distances, then he could visit the cities, Abakan, Kyzyl, Novokuznetsk, Kemerovo, Barno, Bisk, etc. and hundreds of villages that would be on his way. And what is the result? Whom did you see? Where did you spend the night? In his clothes, without shoes, without any documents, as a result of which he could be detained anywhere, at any time. Moreover, an important point is nutrition. Worldly food is not acceptable and other food is not. Such messages cause, to put it mildly, bewilderment. The authors of such tales, apparently, do not represent the reasons why people left for the wilderness and hid, nor the mountain Taiga conditions, nor the laws that reigned in those years in the country. And the Lykovs left for the deserts, away from people, not to then walk around almost all over Siberia. And why was it necessary to conquer such distances, when in dozens of villages that he knew like the back of his hand, in which he had been many times before, where co-religionists and numerous relatives live, to which Erinat was within easy reach, he could resolve any issues. And the rumor would have spread throughout the district. But he never went anywhere and never was. Even at the end of his life, when he was offered to visit his relatives, when all the dangers had passed, he did not dare. Peskov once asked Karp Osipovich if he would like to visit relatives, and promised to help, but he flatly refused. He said that, in the world they will seize him as soon as a hazel grouse. Here I said about articles, notes, where the authors report unverified facts, heard from someone, misunderstood, calculated to be a sensation, and give it to the press for granted. As a result, many dates, as well as events, are distorted to the point of surprise. And thousands of readers who sincerely sympathize with this family and are trying to find out the details about the fate of these people receive information that has nothing to do with the facts of the Lykovs' life. Of course, it is difficult to cover the events of a long time without almost any documentary evidence at hand, and everyone can have inaccuracies, but not to the same extent that fables are written, as I said above. However, the bulk of the messages are good narratives written by a wide variety of people. I mean age, profession, position held, etc. Among them are tourists, doctors, scientists, writers. Summing up this part of the story, I want to say that the best of what has been written is Peskov's Taiga Dead End. In his documentary story everything is as it was, everything is as it is. Beautifully written, delicately, without belittling anyone's dignity. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafya Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching. A story about the attitude of individuals to the life of the Lykov family. All the war years the director of the reserve was Alexei Dmitryevich Cherstvov. An engineer by training, a great connoisseur of wildlife, an excellent hunter and a wonderful person. He was faced with the difficult task of protecting the vast, inaccessible territory of the reserve, practically without observers. At all cordons, the duties of observers were performed by the wives of their husbands who had gone to the front. There were only women in the scientific department. and transport is only riding horses. Alexei Dmitryevich devoted a lot of time to the residents of the village and especially to the youth. He would often come to our little club in the evenings and, by the light of a kerosene lamp, would tell us about the situation at the front. Sometimes, in a good mood, I played the guitar and sang romances. He knew and loved music. Throughout the war in our village there was no electricity, no radio, no store, and the newspapers reached us on the 10th-12th day after they were published. We did not have any ration cards for the entire war, we grew bread ourselves and received flour according to wartime standards. But, despite the almost complete absence of men and other difficulties, he managed to control the territory of the reserve, the southern border of which was guarded by border guards. For a little over 3 years of his work, he traveled almost all of its territory. He made 4 trips to the Abakan cordon, a hot spring, and along the Bedouin River valley to the southern border with Tuva. Each time, leaving for the Abakan cordon, he included in the expedition one of the scientific workers and 1 or 2 elderly hunters. He took 5 kilograms of salt with him to replenish the supply at the cordon and always said, "For Lykov, maybe we'll lure him out of the Taiga with salt." He hid the salt in a cache, which Lykov knew about, and left a note in which he described the events, insisted on leaving the Taiga and said that the cordon was at his disposal. But, as time has shown, Lykov was never at the cordon, everything was whole. Later, I think in 1950, we accidentally found one of Cherstvov's notes in the pantry. During his next trip to the Abakan section, he left everyone on the cordon, and himself in a boat climbed 6 kilometers, 10-15 up the river, but nowhere did he find any traces of a person. But, as he said, the beasts are everywhere darkness. On their return from their last trip in September 1945, when there were about 8 kilometers to our village, a rather large bear unexpectedly jumped out onto the trail about 70 meters in front of them. For a while he stopped, as if looking at people, and almost immediately, like a tank, rushed at them. First rode in front, and, as those who followed him said, he instantly pulled off the carbine from his back, and, as he was in the saddle, fired offhand. The bear rolled over its head and remained lying on its back, slowly opening its paws. Having twitched the bolt, the director fired again, but there was no need, the first bullet hit right in the forehead. A few seconds later, in the ensuing silence, Alexei Dmitryevich looked around and, jumping off his horse, smiling, asked, "Are you alright? Go say hello." All 3 carefully dismounted and even more carefully approached the defeated beast. People was saved by his art of the arrow, otherwise the bear would have disheveled everyone. Turst said that after the war he would definitely find Lykov and move him to the cordon. In November 1945, he handed over the cases and left for his native Moscow. Later, the Council of Ministers sent him to Novarkarsk, where he was appointed chief engineer of a plant for the production of electric locomotives. With one of the former employees of the Entrusted, who took part in a trip to the Abakan cordon in 1947, we lived in the same city and sometimes met. Our last meeting took place somewhere in the mid-70s. We sat for a long time in the park and remembered those times. Here, many years later, he practically repeated the same words as then. He said that Lykov himself did not pose any danger, he was not involved in anything, and he did not live on the territory of Gorny Altai, so they were not really interested in him. His main fault was that he took away his family and thus deprived his children of absolutely everything, and there was no order to allegedly liquidate Lykov. The Lykovs suffered anyway, Evdokim was killed, but in this case neither the authorities nor representatives of the authorities had anything to do with this. This murder was on the conscience of the workers of the reserve, who, as he said, covered themselves with the fact that Evdokim allegedly resisted. Whether he told me everything or not is hard to say, but in my opinion, he was not dissembling. Many of the deeds of those distant now years have gone into the past and are already covered with the ashes of time. In general, the authorities dealt with the question of what to do with the Lykov family, and in 1951 it was decided to find them, settle them in the reserve cordon and enroll Karp Osipovich as an observer. And this work was entrusted to the management of the reserve. But we already knew about this in 1951. Another thing surprised me. Chizikov told me about one person who was interested in organs at the time. It turns out that I knew him and told him about it. Chizikov laughed and replied that it is good that you didn't know about it, you can't know much then. This man was not guilty of anything, therefore they did not touch him. These are the vicissitudes of fate. In essence, now, when I describe the events of those distant now years, it may seem to many that then there was nothing to do but what to think and talk about the Lykovs, to hold meetings, to argue what to do, etc. In fact, life went on as usual. The Lykovs were rarely remembered, and he practically did not interest anyone. And if not for the reserve, no one would have remembered about them. One of the residents of the village of Kilinsk, where the Lykovs' relatives live, told me. Nobody drove them into the Taiga, they left themselves, and, thinking, added, Lykovs martyrs, they lived in darkness and will go into oblivion. But here it can be argued that the Lykovs, with their hermitage, their way of life, in the complete absence of contact with people, attracted everyone's attention. The case is truly unique. They learned about them in other countries of the world and, in hot pursuit, wrote a lot, talked a lot, but gradually the passions subsided and calmed down. Time will pass, and they will be forgotten, and there will be no one to remember. Other global events are replacing the affairs of bygone days. And all this will remain in literary sources and in archives. People reacted with understanding to the tragedy of the Lykov family and sincerely tried to help these people in some way, at least somehow. This is characteristic of the Russian soul. And the fact has come true. The Lykovs were helped and are still helping Agafya Karpovna, who remained alone in this life. The world is not without good people, and thank God. The main thing now is to arrange life in long-suffering Russia so as not to be afraid of tomorrow, and the most important thing is that people do not have the desire to drop everything and go wherever they look. It is in Russia that there are all the possibilities that exist in order to ensure a healthy lifestyle for everyone without exception, and so that an abundance of everything reigns throughout Russia. In conclusion, I would like to say that I deliberately did not touch upon the issues of the inner life of this family. Almost everything has become a thing of the past, and now it would not be entirely correct on my part to stir up this past, to look into their personal lives, and, probably, it would be incorrect. Their internal affairs are the same as those of most families of Russian peasants. The Lykovs, like many peasant families, whether they were old believers or worldly ones, were hard-working, honest, but most importantly, they loved their land and, as I said, were happy for their motherland, Russia. They had all the qualities of the Russian character. The Lykovs were not tainted in anything. The only thing that distinguished them was their life path. It would be unfair to blame Karp Osipovich with his firm character now for the correctness of the decisions he makes, just because this question can be asked to everyone, and whether the decisions were made right there, above, in those distant now, in relation to the majority of the population of the state. But everything is a thing of the past. The main thing is not to repeat the mistakes now, of which they have piled up so many that you cannot count. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video, and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafya Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching. It is not possible to accurately judge the nature of the disease and the causes of death of the Lykovs, since none of the doctors saw them at that time and the case history as a document does not exist. Therefore, my conclusions are based on the stories of the Lykovs who survived. The main points that I highlighted were as follows. The Lykovs fell ill at the end of September, almost all at the same time. The first, after long cooling in water, was Dmitry. According to Agafya, he suffered from shortness of breath, had difficulty breathing, fever, chills. As can be concluded, Dmitry had severe pneumonia, from which he died a week later. On the same days, all the other Lykovs fell ill. They also had symptoms of damage to the respiratory system, weakness, shortness of breath, a feeling of suffocation, cough, fever. Probably, Karp Osipovich was the easiest to get sick. Natalya was the most sick, she had hemoptysis. As the Lykovs say, after self-treatment with a decoction of nettle, rhubarb and bloodstone, celandine, their condition improved somewhat. However, hard work in the cold, digging potatoes from under the snow, preparing firewood, Dmitry's funeral, again led to a deterioration in the Lykovs' health. Savin's symptoms of intestinal inflammation and bleeding from it, probably hemorrhagic enterocolitis, were added. With symptoms of complete exhaustion and loss of strength, he died. During Savina's illness, Natalya took care of him, did the laundry. By the way, after the death of Savin, all his dirty linen and outerwear were carried away from the hut and burned. It looks like the Lykovs understood that this could be a source of infection. After the death of Savin, Natalya's condition deteriorated again catastrophically, and after 10 days she died. At the same time Agafya was seriously ill and Karp Osipovich was easier. They also showed signs of pneumonia. Only by the end of winter did Agafya feel relief. The younger body coped with the disease. From what has been said, the conclusion suggests itself that the cause of the Lykovs' illness and death was some kind of infection, the development of which was facilitated by cooling, hard exhausting work and, of course, the weakening or absence of specific immunity. The milder course of the disease in the eldest Karp Osipovich is probably due to the greater training of his immune systems, since he grew up and lived for many years in the world, in contact with many people, and therefore with many infections. According to my observations, Karp Osipovich gave up a little, wrinkles increased, his back was bent. There is no longer that easy, flying, gallant gait, although he still looks younger than his years, fast, mobile, physically strong enough. The grandfather complains of frequent pain in the back and lower abdomen, hearing loss. The latter is probably only a small trick of the old man, since the hearing test showed him to be in good condition. At a distance of about 15 meters, he hears a slight click of the camera well. Karp Osipovich still sees well, reads his books freely even in low light conditions. His sense of color is the same as that of Agafya, it is not disturbed, he distinguishes color correctly. Karp Osipovich's face is swollen, especially under the eyes, which is probably associated with mosquito and midge bites. With excitement, his hands begin to shake, shortness of breath appears up to 28 times a minute, the veins in his neck swell. However, there are no clear signs of pulmonary and cardiovascular insufficiency. To the question, how old are you? He answered -82. 3 years ago he said -84. Why? According to my calculations, Karp Osipovich should be 87 years old. Agafya has grown somewhat stout. There is a slight swelling of the eyelids, possibly as a result of a change in the salt diet. And Agafya's eyes, it turns out, are grey-green. She notes that in the winter of 1981 there was a severe suffocation, it is both choking and choking, it is so hard, her strength has recently diminished, she began to get tired quickly, her sore hand interferes with her work. She complains of pain and swelling in the lower third of the left forearm, muscle weakness in this arm, a growth on the bone. Agafya also has a slight swelling of the joints on the hands. She feels in them, more in the morning, aches, numbness. Sis, I see a birch bark on the floor, I take it, there is no feeling, my hands endure, they have aches. It was from hard work in the cold, in the ground and dampness that she developed the phenomena of polyarthritis, inflammation of the joints. However, she refused the examination and our help. Clothes on Lykovs are no longer homespun. At first Karp Osipovich was wearing a light brown robe, like a hospital gown, dark trousers made of plain fabric and felt boots. Then, when he came to the fire, he was already in disguise, a grey felt hat, an almost black jacket, trousers and rubber boots, broad knee. Agafya was wearing a dark grey shirt, pants and fashionable rubber boots. Agafya saw a camera lying on a tree stump and did not go to our fire. Karp Osipovich came up and said that Agafya was afraid of our camera. We removed him, Karp Osipovich called Agafya. We spent the night in the Lykovs' hut on the floor, they were so cordially invited that it was inconvenient to refuse. Agafya was already asleep on the bench, and not on the floor, as 3 years ago. Karp Osipovich slept on a gobchik, a bench near the stove. The Lykovs got up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Between times we prayed, then we had breakfast. On the eve of the Lykovs, they cooked potatoes and soup, potatoes, rasula, rice groats. They ate everything, poured everything from the cup into a spoon. The potatoes were dipped in salt, maybe this is the reason for the swelling on the face. Agafya taught us how to make fire. A tinder is placed on the flint and a spark is knocked out by a crestal, a piece of a file. When the tinder gets warm, it is placed between two coals and the fire is fanned, and a splinter is inserted into the gap between the coals and it lights up. This is on fire for Agafya, but our attempts were unsuccessful. August 18. The Lykovs need to go to the lower hut to dry the berries, get a pine nut. We are going with them. He presented Karp Osipovich with a blue flashlight. The old man was overjoyed. Eyes lit up, smiled. He asked me to show you how to light it. I tried it myself, I liked it. Said it's from the sun, like the sun. Asked the price. I said 2-3 rubles. That's not very expensive, the grandfather stated. It turns out that he already understands prices. I explained to my grandfather that when the batteries run out, the light will be bad and will go out completely. How long will it burn, how to make it burn again? Followed by a question. Explained in detail and showed. The grandfather was satisfied. Agafya, as if in exchange, gave me a pair of her old moccasins, made of merle leather. A friendly exchange took place, everyone was satisfied. At 15 o'clock we all went together to the lower hut, leaving half of our things. The way took 35 minutes to the pass, and then descend for another hour and a half. The Lykovs tolerate physical activity quite well. So, when climbing a steep mountain for 30 minutes with a load on his shoulders, the breathing rate for Karp Osipovich was 32 times per minute, for Agafya -24, and for the members of our expedition it ranged from 36 to 40. After a 2-hour journey through the mountains, Karp Osipovich without stopping, he immediately took up other hard work, while the members of the expedition needed rest. On the way, Agafya showed the place where last year they put out the fire for 2 days. They were afraid that it would go to the upper hut. They extinguished until they lost their pulse, then they were sick for a long time. According to Agafya, only the rain stopped the fire. The trail goes all the time through blueberries, lingonberries, honeysuckle bushes constantly come across. Agafya showed us natural plantations of badan with surprisingly large leaves like cabbage. In the years of famine, they collected incense, boiled the root in 7 waters and ate. They also used but to dye clothes shovels. Agafya walks along a path about 30 meters from Vyacheslav, who smokes, and expresses displeasure. What a bad smell, there is nothing to breathe. This is a demonic occupation. After going to the lower hut, Agafya treated us to red currants and nuts. The Lykovs are quite used to us, they keep themselves at ease, they talk freely. They said that the Trier refused the sacrament before his death. The Lykovs interpret this as, I did not want to die, I was young, I wanted to live. Before his death, Savin asked for fresh and salted fish and white bread and butter. The fish were given, but they did not have time to bring butter and bread from the Geologists. Before her death, Natalya bequeathed Karp Osipovich and Agafya to live in the lower hut, closer to people and better arable land. The Tri is buried near the lower hut behind the stream, Savin and Natalya at the upper one, together with their mother, who died 22 years ago from hunger. It was a terrible year, a terrible harvest failure, even the animals were gone, said Karp Osipovich. The Lykovs' mourning begins with Agafya's words, Taiga, bless. And the prayer begins. The Lykovs already eat rice, buckwheat, they especially love and consider oatmeal useful. Groats are sent by co-religionists and relatives. Eat 2 times a day. When they work hard, they still eat potatoes at lunchtime. The roof of the hut is covered with gutters. In a log split in half, a chute is hollowed out in the middle and the roof is covered, laying the logs alternately up and down with a chute. We watched Agafya bake bread. It includes dried potatoes with corn, ground to flour and wheat or rye flour in a ratio of about 6:1. The Lykovs have daily bread, ordinary, everyday, and festive. It is whiter than daily bread and is made of a bagel. Vasko, a new word heard from the Lykovs, means good in a superlative degree. By evening, Vyacheslav was going to go to the Geologists. They tried to persuade him not to go for the night, but referring to the lack of time, he still left. There is something restless in my soul. Geologists are about 20 kilometers away, and there are 4 hours of daylight left. Yes, and walking alone without a weapon in an unfamiliar taiga is not at all safe. Will it work somehow? I slept at night with Lev Stepanovich in a tent. We are trying to separate from the Lykovs so as not to infect them, which we set up not far from the hut, meters from the cliff. It rained most of the evening and night. August 19. After breakfast, the members of our expedition went to the upper hut for the rest of their belongings. Karp Osipovich blessed us on the road. The Lykovs themselves remained in the lower hut. Walking light was not so hard, despite the almost continuous uphill climb. Yes, probably, and we are already being drawn into the load. Weather with variable rain all day and evening. But we seem to be getting used to wet feet and clothes. Walking light, you can clearly see what pristine beauty is around. Going into the hut, they photographed her interior, objects and clothes. New additional windows have been cut in the Lykovs huts. In the middle of the hut there is a stick with a metal trident at the end. This is a device for a torch, called light. The chimney on the hut is wooden, a hollowed out log, coated with clay from the inside. The chisel of the Lykovs from pre-revolutionary times with the stigma of some Petrov catches my eye. In the hut I counted 18 sacred books. There are very old ones, literally decayed at the edges. Some fat old book stands on the shrine and, probably, has not been opened for many years. It is covered in dust and turned black. Two icons are very dusty, one depicts Christ, the other is so dark that you cannot tell what is painted there. Most of the books do not have the year of publication, but on two we find, Psalter, in leather binding, was published in the Moscow Old Believer book printing press in the summer of 7423, the front book, tells about what and how it will be after death, published in 7419. In the hut everything is mixed up, old, made by the Lykovs, things and donated, civilians, 7 axes, many knives, scissors, candles, files, wire, enamel dishes, several pairs of rubber boots. Agafya was presented with a colored umbrella, but she does not need it at all, it lies under the roof. A flower is growing on the window in a birch bark tusa. Agafya has planted it. Under the roof hang beautiful camas skis made by Agafya from willow and spruce. I can imagine how worried the Lykovs are now, that we are alone in the hut. We will still do quite objectionable deeds. But, of course, we try not to touch anything with our hands and not change the routine. I remember how yesterday morning Agafya went out of the hut, looked with emotion at the huge burgundy poppy and said, "During the night the flower has grown." Behind her, Karp Osipovich solidly, on a low note, stated, "Bask." Elvira Viktorovna today painted a sketch, the Lykovs estate. We spent the night in the Lykovs hut, having flooded the piece of iron stove. In the morning I woke up due to the fact that the whole hut was in smoke. A firebrand remained in the stove. The story repeated 3 years ago, when we almost suffocated. Strange stove. August 20. As always, we got up with Lev Stepanovich at 7 o'clock. Bonfire, tea, talk. The rest are asleep. At 8:30 am Elvira Viktorovna is looking for a place to paint. I found it, didn't even have breakfast, and rushed headlong into work. In the evening we went to the lower hut. We went with a load, but quite easily. We get used to the loads. The hip belt is already fastened to the last hole. In the evening the Lykovs came to the fire. Interesting conversation about a bear, flights to the moon. They hold on freely, uninhibited. In a conversation, we hear words and phrases that are unusual for us. For example, got away, passed away, died, Pokerke, call, sergeant, box, to go somewhere, commonplace, to go there and back in one day. Porch, the lower back, commercial, yes so. When I got it, there was a need, I brought water from the stream, says Agafya. Pograna, border guards, burned all the houses. Karp Osipovich talks about their forcible eviction from Lykovskaya Zamka. Their original place of residence is on the Abakan River. Sklinitsa is a bottle. Married. They stir up their minds, they continue to tell a lie. They encroached on a fish, but came with nothing. They wanted to catch a fish, but it didn't work out. There was a privilege, there was an easy life. Immortal clothes, cloth stored in case of death. Fire dope, vodka. Karp Osipovich, talking about a good man, says, he doesn't get hurt with vodka, there is no art behind him. Karp Osipovich explains, there is no need to say thank you, because there used to be an idol, and worshipping an idol is not good. According to Karp Osipovich, once, when he scolded children, Dmitry said, "What a teacher, such students. What audacity." Protest. In the afternoon we were busy with the capital arrangement. We put up another tent, built a shed, and under it a table so that there was a place to store food, eat and sit and chat in rainy weather. The Lykovs threw branches of birch and cedars on the arable land. We asked, for what? Answer, for fertilization. This is probably not a bad fertilization method. For example, the Lykovs have been planting the same potato seeds for over 40 years, and the potatoes are just as good as before. The Lykovs have 2 cats and 1 cat, a gift from Geologists. They are very happy with them. Previously, a very large part of the harvest was taken away by mice and chipmunks, despite the fact that various traps, bowls, were constantly constructed for them. Now these rodents are successfully destroyed by cats. I remember how 3 years ago we spent the night in the Lykovs hut, so at night mice literally walked over us, and now they are inaudible. It is interesting that 2 cats independently travel from one hut to another, but this is about 8 kilometers through the dense Taiga through the mountains. Moreover, they often make these journeys at night. The cats are often left alone when the Lykovs go to another hut, and apparently, do not suffer from hunger. They look smooth and satisfying. The Lykovs are very fond of them, play with them like children, stroke, caress, sleep with them. In general, these are equal members of their family. Agafya herself sues La Patina for the fall from grey store materials sent by her relatives. She sews quickly, skillfully. She also cut herself. We praise for a good job. She smiles shyly, but it is noticeable that she is very pleased. Agafya gave Elvira Viktorovna a cross made of white metal, a little more than Natalya gave me 3 years ago. Agafya and Karp Osipovich persuade Elvira Viktorovna to stay with them. We will dig potatoes and knock them out. Nikolai Mikhailovich asked Agafya to show his sore hand. She laughed and refused. Then he says to Elvira Viktorovna, if Nikolai Mikhailovich was a Christian doctor, I would show him. Probably, this should be understood in such a way that they would accept the help of a baptized doctor of the same faith with them. In the conversation, it turns out that the Lykovs do not recognize healers and wise men. Agafya says, what is the use of magic? The body heals, but the soul destroys. Upon learning that my toothache is aching, Agafya gently teases me, saying, Doctor, let him heal himself. What phrases! It is immediately felt that Agafya remembers much from the Holy Scriptures by heart. August 21. Sunday. The Lykovs are resting. Agafya put on a black shawl with bright flowers. On her head she strengthened a ladder, an object for prayer, like a rosary, made by herself from the vertebrae of a grayling. Bright sunny morning. Found a very nice place. Immediately behind the Lykovs hut there is a sheer cliff and a wonderful view of the Abakan canyon opens from it. I put a plank between the stones. Behind my back there are 2 birch trees standing next to each other. I sit as in an armchair. Today we are going fishing, but while I have free time, I write down some of my observations and impressions. Agafya says that they came to the place of the lower hut, where we are now, 38 years ago. Agafya was then 2 years old. She was born on March 29, and she was baptized on April 3. They came from a parking lot, which they had on the Erinat River. It flows into the Abakan River above the Shek, 6 to 7 kilometers. They left the hut on the Erinat River because someone found them there. We moved to a new place in winter. All their belongings and food supplies, potatoes lasted 3 years, until they cultivated new arable land and got a good harvest, were transported on sledges. For almost the entire first winter, until the hut was cut down, we lived in a hut. You just have to imagine. In a severe winter in the Taiga, live in a hut with small children. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafya Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching.